Hello, everyone, and welcome to the February webinar. We are so glad you're here with us today. I have a few announcements, and then we'll get going. I just want to remind you that we put these webinars on with SA Justice and along with my counterparts, which Ariel Curry is in the Eastern Territory. Joan Kurtz is in the Central Territory, and Jackie Larson is in the Western Territory. And we are here to help give you resources or support in anything regarding anti-trafficking work. So please feel free to reach out to your territorial representative if there's anything we can do to support you. Just a few announcements. Our next webinar is actually in April, and it's going to be on April 21st. And that's going to be looking at the equality model and with Shay Rhodes. And so if you want to register for that, you can go to the SA Justice website. And I think Jackie's going to post that in the chat box for the link if you want to go ahead and register. But we hope you can join us for that one. And I also wanted to remind everyone that tomorrow is End It Day, which the Salvation Army is a coalition partner with the End It movement. And it's a day to just raise awareness for human trafficking. As you can see, I'm in my End It sweatshirt and have my X on my hand already. We did a photo booth here at our headquarters this morning, but it's pretty simple. If you want to just post a picture of your red X on social media and help us raise awareness for human trafficking and use the hashtag End It movement and hashtag SA Justice to help raise awareness. And so today we're so happy to welcome Dr. Kate Watson with us. She's going to be sharing about motivational interviewing, and I'll let her get into those details. But Dr. Watson is a public speaker, author, and podcaster. She has conducted educational workshops in 20 states, 8 countries, and across many fields: healthcare, education, social services, financial advising, victim advocacy, corrections, and leadership. She's also the director emeritus for the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers and is the author of the upcoming book, Only Trying to Help, which is also the name of her podcast, which is now in its 5th season. And I would encourage you to look that up if you want to check out her podcast. So Dr. Watson, we're so happy to have you with us, and thank you for leading our webinar today.
Thank you so much for having me. If you see me kind of looking around, it's because I'm checking to see if all systems are go here and looking to see my microphone moving. It is. Hello, everyone. And I'm really excited to speak about this topic today. Motivational interviewing is something that I get the chance to speak about just about every day. And I always find that there's something I can learn from the group with whom I'm speaking. So I see that there are about 90 of us together right now. I'm going to encourage everyone to right now, while we're kind of getting ourselves organized, to make sure that you have open the chat box feature in Zoom. I like to use the chat box feature for some really efficient communication. I know that we would all love it if we could unmute and have a loud conversation about all the things that are on our minds and examples and case studies. But for a brief workshop like this, and with so many people, I find the best way to share ideas is to put quick, brief ideas into the chat box. So I'm going to recommend you have that ready to go. And I'm going to also just remind you that when you send a message in the chat box, there's a little space that says to, and then you get to choose who that goes to. And I'm going to ask that unless you would like to send a private message, I'm going to ask that you choose all panelists and attendees so that when you share something, everybody can see it, not just me. That'll be pretty important because I may be reading your responses aloud. And if I'm the only one who can see them, it might be very confusing. So just keep that in mind. Let's see, the other little housekeeping item I have before we just dive into it is a little note about language. So when I am training, let's see, for example, healthcare providers, I can refer to them as providers, and the people they work with are patients. When I'm training educators, I can call them teachers or advisors or counselors, and the people they work with are students. In your case, there's a lot of different language we could use. And I just want to make sure that we're all clear on what we're talking about today. So when I refer to the 95 of you who have logged in, I respect that each of you may have very different professional titles. So, in order to describe us as a group, I might lean on terms like practitioner or professional or even interviewer. I apologize if none of those words really resonate with you. I'll ask you to do a little translation in your head. So, for example, if you are a case manager and I call you a professional, maybe you could just translate in your head, oh, she's talking about case managers right now. And we can each do that based on our own professional roles. And then each of you work with people in your day-to-day work. And I don't know for sure what term would be most useful there. When I'm not sure how to describe the people who you work with and the people who you serve, I tend to lean on words like client or participant. If there's a better term, you can do that translation and say, oh, she's referring to the folks who are in the such and such program. You might have to do a little translating for this to make sense for your direct role. And that's just because of the professional diversity that we have in the meeting today. Okay, with that out of the way, now we can dive into motivational interviewing. I have a few PowerPoint slides that I will share periodically. You may notice I don't leave them up the entire time because, well, there's a lot of reasons for that, but sometimes it just makes it difficult for me to see who's putting something in the chat box and managing all that. So I'm going to leave them down for a moment, but they will come up shortly. And I'm saying that for the visual learners who are like, wait, I need to see this. It's coming. But for right now, I would just like to say that motivational interviewing is a kind of conversation that you might have in your work, regardless of what your role is, regardless of what we call you professionally. You have these conversations with people who are in the midst of some sort of change, or maybe a decision that they're trying to make, or maybe a moment of growth or healing, or deciding how to move forward from something that has happened. You meet with people who are in this transition space. And often you're trying to speak to them about how to make that transition. And it might be a conversation about a behavior change. It might be a conversation about a decision to make. It might be a conversation about growth or healing. But I suspect these conversations are quite familiar to you. I'm going to stick a word in the chat box that's pretty important for us today. The word is ambivalent. You're going to hear me say this like 40 times over the next hour. Ambivalent means feeling at least two ways about something at the same time. The people who you work with, again, no matter what your role is, they very likely feel ambivalent about making a change or making a decision or accessing a resource or doing something that has been suggested. They will often feel kind of split or torn. They might say things like, I know I should do the thing that my case manager told me to do, but I have this thing in the way, or this barrier, or this problem, or this challenge. They might say, there's a part of me thinking about making this decision or making this change, whatever it might be that you're talking about. But there's another part of me not so interested, a little hesitant. So here's what I need some help with, folks. I need some help from you to know, what are those things that people feel ambivalent about in your work. I mean, I can tell you what I feel ambivalent about in my own life. I feel ambivalent about getting out of bed on time in the morning, hitting snooze again. A part of me knows I should get out of bed right now. And a part of me knows it's so comfortable and so warm, and I just want to stay here. I'm ambivalent about that. I'm ambivalent about exercising most days. Most days, I think to myself, I know I'll feel better if I get a workout in. And at the same time, I'll watch one more episode of this thing on Netflix. Those are the things I'm ambivalent about. But what about the people who you work with? What are some things that they may feel ambivalent about doing? I'm keeping an eye on the chat box to see what you might contribute there. I see people saying hello. Thank you for that. It's really good to see where you're coming from. Here we go. Ariel added leaving their trafficker. People may feel ambivalent about that. On the one hand, I can see that this is not a healthy environment for me to be in. But on the other hand, I'm not sure I'm ready to make this change yet. I'm not sure I'm ready to take that step. I don't know if it's a good idea. Ronald added, in Pathway of Hope, it may be increasing their income and potentially losing benefits they need. Ronald, I hear this one a lot. People might say things like, on the one hand, it would be nice to be independent and drawing my own income. That would feel good to me. It would make me proud. And at the same time, I'm sort of concerned about losing these benefits that I've come to rely on. I don't know what that might be like. Let me just adjust my screen because now I need the chat box to be bigger now that things are coming in a little faster. Okay, so we have other ideas like reducing drug and alcohol use, going to a meeting to support recovery, going out to work in public with the COVID virus, a concern for people, cutting off toxic family members, ambivalence about taking initiative to do something different, maybe maybe fear of failure or the unknown, trying to weigh the pros and cons depending on the individual situation, work, pay, benefits, resources available, etc. Medication is another really common one. A lot of people will say, I understand that my healthcare provider wants me to take this medication and I see that there may be some benefits, but I don't like the way it makes me feel, or I don't have the money for this right now, or I can't remember to take it. Renee added, leaving a significant other. That really speaks to my world. I do a lot of work in victim advocacy where people are very ambivalent about leaving a relationship that has caused harm. Let's see. And I'm sorry if I'm missing a few because so many good things are coming in now and it's kind of tough to read them all. Moving away from a shelter setting where they may be really connected to people and they're concerned about maybe feeling alone if they leave the shelter. Putting young children in childcare so they can hold down sustainable employment. People are ambivalent about that, always have been, but maybe especially with a pandemic, people may be concerned about that. These are excellent examples of ambivalence. And I feel comforted that you were able to generate such a strong list. It tells me that what we're going to speak about today really speaks your language. It really speaks to the work that you do. So now I'm going to show you a PowerPoint slide. On the PowerPoint slide, you will see this idea of ambivalence represented with an arrow. And you will also see another concept called the writing reflex. Let me share this now. As I've told you, I tend not to leave them up too long. It just becomes complicated for me on Zoom, but I know the visual learners need a little bit of help. So here we go. There's just our title. So motivational interviewing operates from this premise that people may feel ambivalent about making changes. And in the green arrow, you see this idea of ambivalence. That green arrow represents the clients or participants with whom you meet, the people who you serve, the people who you're trying to help. The blue arrow represents us, the 100 or so of us on this call right now, and our colleagues who didn't join today. The blue arrow says writing reflex. The writing reflex is our own instinct or urge to want to fix things, solve problems, correct behavior, offer suggestions, give resources, make people feel better. We often have this pretty natural instinct or urge to want to make things right. That's why it's called the writing reflex. Notice the spelling. It's Rightting. It's not Writing. It's not a writing reflex. That would be kind of funny if we had a reflex to start writing. No, we seem to have a reflex to make things right. Now you see on the screen, these arrows are pointing at one another. That's meant to show you or represent a meeting between an ambivalent client or participant and a practitioner, a professional, a provider who has this strong writing reflex. So you might also notice those arrows are kind of colliding. Let's think about that a little bit. This can always come back up. I'm going to take the slide down so I can communicate a little bit more clearly with you. But I'm curious to know in the chat box so that we can all see your responses. I'm curious to know, what do you think happens when an ambivalent person meets up with someone who has a strong writing reflex? Or, in other words, what happens when someone who's kind of on the fence or unsure about doing something meets up with someone else who is just salivating at the thought of solving a problem today? They come together and have a conversation. I'm curious what the outcome might be. Jeannie was right on it. Jeannie said they shut down. Now, for the sake of time, I won't take a poll here because this is a brief session that we have. But I will just say, often I will take a poll and I will ask the group, who do you think shuts down? Do you think it is the ambivalent person who shuts down? Or do you think it is the person with the writing reflex who shuts down? And again, I'm going a little fast for the sake of time. I will cut to the chase and tell you that people usually guess that it's the ambivalent person who shuts down. I sort of agree. Yeah, I love a few people jumped in the chat box with both. It's both. That is where I'm going with this. So thank you for those of you who are right on top of it. We often think that it's just the client or the participant who's going to just close off in this moment. I can't tell you how many emails a day I get from professionals who say, how do I deal with my client who's shut down? And I usually respond with something like, how are you feeling? Because I find that, sure, clients or participants, they may at times shut down. They may start giving us 1 and 2 word responses. They might suddenly sound like this. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's fine. Yeah, I get it. Sure. No, it's cool. And they're really closing us off with these very brief responses. Maybe they don't take our phone calls anymore. Maybe they don't come to the next appointment. Those are examples of a client or a participant shutting down. But I have traveled the world teaching people about motivational interviewing, and I have met thousands of shut down professionals, people who are professionally shutting down, getting burnt out, closing off. And they say things like, I just can't do this anymore, Kate. Like, I tell people what to do all day long. They don't do it. I just can't keep having the same conversation. I'm over it. Like, I'm drawing a line. If people want help, they can come get help. But if they don't want help, I gotta wash my hands of this. I can't worry about it anymore. And some of them will pat themselves on the back for having really good professional boundaries. Listen, I love talking about boundaries. I could talk about boundaries for days, but that's not boundaries. Boundaries doesn't mean that we give up on people who don't change or resolve their ambivalence as quickly as we would like them to. I call that shutting down on folks. So when I said, what happens when ambivalence meets the writing reflex, the first thing I saw in the chat box was they shut down. We spent some time talking about that now, but I'll tell you some other things that have kind of floated up in the chat box, but I caught them. People said defensive. Well, who do you think gets defensive? Is it the person who's ambivalent, or is it the person with the writing reflex? And again, for the sake of time, I might just get there a little bit faster than you do, but I'll bet some of you are already thinking, thanks, Fanny and Juanita, both, both. So this is what it might sound like when a client or participant get a little bit defensive. They might, with their hands up, say something like, oh, it's not really as bad as it seems. Oh, honestly, things are okay. I'll be all right. Let's not worry about it. And they're kind of defending the status quo for themselves. They're defending how their lives are today. Okay, that might be defensive. But I have met a lot of people who let that writing reflex out They say things like, you know what you need to do? You know what you should give a try? Here, go to this website, access this resource, use these coping skills. They tell people what to do. And then when it doesn't go well, they get defensive. And the professional in the situation will say things like, look, I'm only trying to help. Look, I'm coming from a good place. I only have your best interest in mind. I don't do this for my health. This is for you. And these are defensive statements that sometimes we make as professionals. So even if you don't do it out loud, or maybe you wait and do it at the water cooler with a colleague, some of us are prone to getting defensive ourselves. We defend our writing reflex. Okay. So, a couple of other things that I think have floated up in the chat box that I may have missed along the way. We talked about when people shut down. We talk about when people get defensive. Sometimes when that blue arrow and that green arrow meet and it's ambivalence talking to the writing reflex and they're having a conversation, sometimes the result is that it blows up into a full-blown confrontation. Sometimes, I think kind of rarely in my experience, but sometimes it escalates into, you don't understand me, you don't get my life, mind your own business, leave me alone. And then the professional or practitioner sometimes, and again, I admit rarely, but sometimes will fire back with, you came to me for help. So I don't know what you're all upset about. So sometimes this escalates. Here's my point, folks. We could spend 2 hours going on a long list of all the not so helpful things that result when ambivalence meets the writing reflex. The main point here is that, well, there's probably two main points. One is that the writing reflex isn't getting us anywhere. That urge, that thing that probably brought you to this work in the first place, that part of you that so badly wants to help, can sometimes grow so strong, it's almost to our detriment and almost to the detriment of the people we're trying to help. I like to call it like extreme compassion, when you just so badly want to see good things for people that you almost can't contain yourself. And it comes out in that writing reflex. We find time and time again, the result is not so good. What percentage of the time, and I do want you to take a guess in the chat box, of all the times that writing reflex comes out, what percentage of the time do you think it leads to a positive outcome? In other words, if you imagine all the times that professionals around the world might say, well, here's what I think you need to do next. How many times out of 100, you think, what percentage of the time do you think the client looks back and says, you know what, you're right, that's exactly what I need to do? Wow, that was so helpful. I'm really glad I spoke to you today. I'm loving your guesses. I'm loving how low they are. So I'm seeing everything from -1, which is a hilarious response, up to, I think I saw maybe 20 as our high mark. Judy's guessing 50. But your guesses are pretty close. In fact, a few of you landed right on it. It's interesting, depending on the field of the folks who I'm training, the guesses may be lower or higher. When I ask doctors that question, oh, it's so sweet. Doctors really think that we take their advice. I think that's dear. Doctors guess like 50% of the time, 60% of the time, 70% of the time, they think their writing reflex is helpful. When I train folks in social services, human services, they have a much more accurate view of things. We find that when we study this in research, it's 10% of the time. One time out of 10, if you tell someone, well, here's what I really think you need to do, and this will help you out, and this is the best strategy, and here's the best resource, and take these steps. One time out of 10, that person will look back at you and say, okay, cool. That was really helpful. I'm really glad we talked about this. This is great. And here's what's also interesting. We've studied that 10%. We know a little bit about them. We know what gets you into that 10%. And it's not that they're just agreeable people. It's not that they're just like obedient or something like that. When we look into that 10% of people who respond well to the writing reflex, turns out whatever we were telling them to do, they were going to do anyway. And the only reason they have a positive response to all of our suggestions and advice is because it's confirming something they were already thinking. And it feels good to have an expert, a professional, like endorse your idea. But otherwise, it's not like our advice is really helping people who were lost and clueless and didn't know what to do. For those folks, it seems a lot more helpful if we can calm our writing reflex down, if we can soothe that inner urge that we have to want to get in there and save everybody, if we can relax that a little bit, we find that we can replace it with some motivational interviewing skills. And when we do that, it seems to be a lot more helpful for people. So I wanted to just say, if you're thinking, I don't know, Kate, I tell people what to do all the time and they say, thanks, great, let's go for it. There's a couple things that could be happening. One is that you might have a lot of people who already have good ideas and they liked having your confirmation. Another thing that could be happening is maybe they are just agreeing and then they're going to sort it out later. I know that I tend to be guilty of the nod and smile. When people tell me what to do, I go like this. Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. Thank you. Fanny's saying yes. I'm guilty of the fake agreement. This is every Uber I'm ever in, and I use a lot of Ubers in my life. Usually, I'm in the back seat, just trying to get somewhere, and my Uber driver starts teaching me something that I didn't ask about. I really wasn't curious about, but I was raised to be polite. My mother would be very upset with me if I said, please stop, right? So I was raised to be polite. So in the back seat, I say, wow, cool. Oh, well, thank you for telling me about that. That's so interesting. There are times that that is happening to us professionally where we might be letting that writing reflex out and folks are being nice because they like you and they may at times agree and say sure, sure, yep, cool, great suggestion, I'm going to do that. But by and large, we find for the most part that writing reflex is just not serving us well. So we have to do something else. And here's where I like to say something that might disappoint you. I'm willing to disappoint you. I'd like to say motivational interviewing is not, nor has it ever been, about getting people to do things we want them to do. Mm-mm. No. Folks, whose behavior do you have any control over? Put your thought in the chat box. Whose behavior do you have any control over? A lot of you are optimists, I think. You're saying my own, my own, my own, mine, 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 mine. Yeah, I'm going to add a caveat. Thank you, Bianca. You got there ahead of me. Bianca said my own sometimes. And I like to say I have control over my own behavior at best on a good day, right? Like when the stars were all aligned, I woke up on the right side of the bed. I might have some control over myself, but if it was so easy to control my own behavior, I would have worked out today already when it was on my calendar and I was supposed to exercise and I didn't. If it was so easy to manage my own behavior, I would have had a healthier breakfast today. If it was so easy to make changes in our lives, we would all be doing it. So it is tough enough. It is tough enough to manage ourselves. It's impossible to control anybody else. So let's let that go right now. I always say that and keep an eye on the participant list to see if anybody's like, I'm out of here, right? Like I was here so I could learn how to get people to do things. If you would like to bail now, I respect it. But motivational interviewing is not about getting other people to leave that relationship or take their medication or get off of drugs and alcohol. We have no control over that. Motivational interviewing is about managing the only thing you have a little hope of controlling, which is yourself at best on a good day. So I'm laughing at Elizabeth's comment. No, it is not a webinar on mind control. Motivational interviewing is about us learning to change our approach. So when you're working with someone who's ambivalent about reducing drug and alcohol use, remind yourself, I'm not here to change this person. I'm here to change my approach. When you're working with someone who's ambivalent about taking medication, remind yourself, I'm not here to change this person. I'm here to change my approach. When you're working with someone who's ambivalent about leaving a relationship or leaving a trafficker, remind yourself, I'm not here to change this person. I'm here to change my approach, because 40 years of research on motivational interviewing and a couple 100,000 research studies that have been done on this topic keep revealing again and again and again that if we are willing, as the professional in the conversation, if we are willing to change our approach, if we are willing to calm that inner urge of the writing reflex, relax it a little bit, and replace it with something else, we can be more helpful to people. No one is saying you can control people. Nope, you can't do that. But you can be more helpful to people if you manage your own questions that you're asking, tone of voice that you're using, anxiety that you might be showing. If you can practice managing those things on your end, there's an impact on the people who you care about helping. There's a positive impact on them. So it's about getting out of this mindset of, how do I get them to do this? How do I get them to go to a support group? How do I get them to apply for a job? Folks, motivational interviewing is not the skill set for getting people to do things. It's the skill set for managing your own urge to want to fix them and save them, because that gets in the way. All right. Um, all right. So Angelina has asked, can I restate this or write it out? So I'm going to first restate it. I invite anyone to write it out for me who might be willing to do that. And if I don't get a taker, I will write it out, because I respect the visual learners who don't learn so well by hearing. I say I respect them. I am not one of them. I'm a very auditory person. So it helps to have reminders that not everybody learns that way. But I will say it aloud again. When you're working with people and you notice their ambivalence, they're doing this back and forth thing, it helps to remind yourself, I cannot change the person I'm working with. I care about them. I hope they make changes. I hope they make decisions that are positive and healthy. I can hope for it, but I can't make that happen. All I can do is what I can do. All I can do is manage my own writing reflex, my own urge to want to fix and solve and offer suggestions. And if I can learn to calm that urge down, it benefits the people who I really care about. If I can change, it helps other people. If I can change, it helps other people. So when I lead workshops on motivational interviewing, it's usually a full day or 2 full days or sometimes 3 full days. We go through this process of changing our behavior. It's really not a workshop on how to get people to take their medication and stop drinking alcohol. I don't do that. I lead workshops on how we can change our approach, knowing and trusting that it will help people resolve that ambivalence. It will help them. Thanks for the folks who are doing this in the chat box. I'm watching you type out what I'm saying, and I'm thinking, what a cool exercise for those of you who are kind of note takers and that's how you learn. This sort of worked out that you're doing it. Thank you for that. Okay. So let me think of where we ought to go next. We have 25 minutes, and I want to make sure I leave lots of time at the end for questions. So I think I'll pull up the slides again and walk you through as best I can what this might look like. Let me share. So here's our arrows again. And moving along, I want to offer to you that motivational interviewing has, well, before I show you this, motivational interviewing has 2 main components. And in a full workshop where you can really learn the skills of motivational interviewing, In those two main components, you'll see something called the relational components, which I'm about to show you on, here we go, on this slide. The relational component is traditionally called the spirit of motivational interviewing. I'm finding that not everybody likes calling this the spirit of MI, so you're welcome to call this the relational component. This is the part of motivational interviewing that is about how we relate to people who we work with. How do we view our roles and their roles and our relationships together? This is about rapport building and growing a strong connection with the people we hope to serve. The components of the spirit of MI are partnership, acceptance, compassion, and evocation. Now, I would normally spend like 3 or 4 hours going through the spirit of motivational interviewing. I think for today, I'm going to cut this down to a couple of minutes because partnership, acceptance, and compassion are things that I'll bet you know a lot about. I'll bet you've heard a lot about, read a lot about. These are words you're familiar with. Partnership, acceptance, and compassion are components of a lot of helping styles. It doesn't have to be motivational interviewing. If you've gone to school for this or for social work or human services or whatever you went to school for, you probably learned those concepts. Those probably aren't new for you. I'll spend a few minutes talking about the last one because evocation is really when motivational interviewing becomes motivational interviewing. Evocation is the thing that makes this a little bit different than something else you may have learned in some other workshop some other day. Evocation is distinct. So here, evocation is the idea that we, as helping professionals, whatever your title is, we evoke motivations and evoke ideas from clients and participants. We try to draw them out of people rather than trying to give them to people. So, in other words, rather than telling someone, well, here's what I really think would be helpful for you, I might ask them, what do you think would be helpful for you right now? That's a very simple example, but for a quick, very simple example, I want you to hear the difference between thinking I can give motivation to someone versus trying to uncover it or draw it out. Motivational interviewing operates from the premise that the people who you work with are motivated. They just might not be in touch with their motivation right now. Sometimes it's hidden under piles of doubt and shame and trauma and all these things that tend to pile on top of our motivations to be our best selves. With motivational interviewing, we're not trying to pile more things on top. We're trying to draw out what's that motivation in you that may be deep down hidden. And we go exploring and evoking motivation. I like to say this is the difference between motivational speaking and motivational interviewing. And I smile when I say that because my parents don't know the difference. So they still tell all of their friends that I'm a motivational speaker. I am not, nor have I ever been one, but they don't know the difference. My parents think that I tell people things that will motivate them. I don't know how to do that. What I do is motivational interviewing. I draw out things that might be motivating for people. I'm going to stop sharing for a second because I see this box lighting up that I have comments and I can't see what they are. So for right now, I'm going to stop sharing and see what I've missed. Okay. Yeah, so things like they tell us what to do. Yes, that's the spirit of evocation. We need to help them find their strengths. Yes, that's the spirit of evocation, but also accepting them as people with strengths. So Maria's adding, giving them the option so that they can make a decision for themselves. Turning around the question is a good exercise. So thanks for your comments there. Okay. So that is the partnership, acceptance, compassion, evocation. Those are the elements of that spirit of motivational interviewing. That's the part that you kind of just feel But there's also the technical component of motivational interviewing. And any of you who've been to a workshop before, I am so confident that you have seen before the acronym OARS. I just put it in the chat box for you. OARS probably looks familiar to anyone who's learned MI before. OARS represents the technical components. These are the 4 basic skills that make up motivational interviewing. It's technical because this goes beyond just how do we view our role and how do we understand the meaning of help and service. This becomes, okay, what do we actually do? What do we actually say? How do we deliver on this skill set? And so in a longer workshop, we spend time practicing the skills that are components of OARS. I'm going to put them on the screen for you. Here we go, share that. And right here, open-ended questions, affirmations, reflective listening, and summaries. What I need to do now is explain to you how we use these 4 skills in motivational interviewing to evoke what we call change talk. So again, if you're wondering what those 4 skills are, it's open-ended questions, affirmations, reflective listening or reflections, and summaries. And many of these tools, in your work, you do these things. You listen and say back what you've heard. You summarize your conversation. You use open-ended questions. You affirm people's strengths. These skills are very familiar to you, I know. You might be wondering, why does anyone need 3 days to learn motivational interviewing? Well, let me say a little bit about that, and then I'll start to open it up for some questions in a moment. The reason this becomes a skill set that can be kind of difficult to learn is because we use those 4 skills, open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries, to try to help people give voice to both sides of their ambivalence. When people are feeling ambivalent about making changes in their lives, they feel a bit split. There's this part of them and there's this part of them. They might say, on the one hand, I know I should cut down on my drinking. On the other hand, I always fail. So what's the point of trying? They might say, on the one hand, I'm really unhappy in this relationship. But on the other hand, I really think my partner can change. People feel 2 ways about something at the same time. We've already talked about that. We find that it's so helpful when we can give voice to ambivalence, and we find that people are more likely to resolve their ambivalence, resolve that tension, that push pull of, I'm torn, I'm on the fence. They're more likely to resolve that when we help, in particular, that side of them that is a little motivated to change, when we help that side speak a little bit more. Let me explain that again, kind of from the beginning. When we say that people have 2 sides of them, that ambivalence of kind of interested in change, maybe a little less interested in change, we have words to describe those sides. When the part of me that is leaning toward change or slightly interested or open-minded in making a change starts to speak up, we call that language change talk. I just put that in the chat box. We call that change talk. So even this morning, when my alarm clock went off, my first thought was, oh, I need to get out of bed. I'm going to put that in the chat box. Why not? Let me have my little free hour of therapy with you today. I need to get out of bed was the first thought in my mind. Second thought in my mind, you could probably guess, but it's just so comfy here. That second part, that's not change talk. That second part where I say, but it's just so comfy here, that part comes from the other side of ambivalence. And we call that sustained talk. Commonly, when people express their ambivalence to you, when they say it out loud, you'll start to notice this pattern of speech. change talk, but sustain talk, change talk, but sustain talk, change talk, but sustain talk. You will notice this pattern where people say things like, I want to do this, fill in the blank with whatever it is, but I can't for some reason. Or they will say, I could do this, fill in the blank with whatever it is, but I don't want to. Or they will say, I know I have to do this, but I'm scared or I'm not ready. They will say change talk, but sustain talk. And that's fine. That's how we uncover ambivalence. That's how we understand ambivalence, and we can work with that. We find that when your clients and participants start to tip the scales a little bit, and they're spending a greater proportion of their time voicing change talk, research over the last 40 years finds that they are more likely to make changes. Let me word that very carefully, though. We are not saying change talk causes behavior change. We don't know that. I mean, of course, we would like to say that. We don't know that. We actually don't know why this works at all. We don't know the mechanism by which voicing change talk seems to really help people. That's why we don't call motivational interviewing a theory yet. We call this a communication style. But decades of research keep revealing to us again and again and again that when we can calm down that writing reflex, and instead of telling people what to do, we can try and draw out more of their own change talk, or what I like to call their own self advocacy. They do seem to be more likely to change. Why? We haven't answered that question yet. We don't know. But we do find time and time again across many disciplines over decades of research that when we provide those opportunities for someone to give voice to their own advocacy for change, they seem more likely to resolve that stuck feeling and start to take some steps forward. So when I show you, and I'll put it back up, when I show you those 4 skills, and you're thinking, I already know those things. I already know how to make an open-ended question. I already know how to affirm people's strengths. I already know how to do reflective listening. And I definitely know what a summary is. I believe you. I believe you that you know what those things are. But when you go to a full workshop in motivational interviewing to really practice and practice and practice these skills, you're not just practicing how to do them. You're practicing how to use them to provide opportunities for change talk, because that seems to be what's really helpful for people. So again, we cannot make people voice change talk, right? We can't make them do anything. All I can do is calm down my writing reflex and provide these opportunities for change talk to be evoked. They're just opportunities. Clients have the right to pass on that opportunity. You know, if I ask a person a question like, what makes you want to reduce your drug and alcohol use? I'm providing an opportunity for change talk. And my client has every right to not answer that question, pass on it, tell me, no way, I'm still going to drink. They don't have to take the opportunity. It's my job to provide it. And I like to say that that's what motivational interviewing is. You know, if you Google a definition about motivational interviewing, usually you'll get a definition like it's a conversation about change. Okay, I mean, that's not wrong. It is a conversation about change. But I like to say, and I can put this in the chat box for us, motivational interviewing. Sorry, I'm trying to type and speak at the same time. Motivational interviewing may be a conversation about change, but it is the practice of calming I'm going to put RR for writing reflex, and providing opportunities for CT, which is change talk, instead. That's in the chat box now. Motivational interviewing, sure, you could say it's just a conversation about change. But in a more detailed definition, motivational interviewing is the practice of calming our own writing reflex and providing opportunities for change talk instead. Research also shows that when we let out the writing reflex, when we say, you know what, I'm just going to tell this person, these are the resources you need, this is the phone number you have to call, these are the coping skills you need to use, and these are the steps you need to take. When I just let out the writing reflex, It's a nearly predictive response that the person will respond with sustained talk. Nearly predictive response that if I say, do this, they will tell me about their barriers, their challenges, or why it won't work. And so I like to say the writing reflex only provokes sustained talk. I'll put that for the visual learners. The writing reflex only provokes sustained talk. We can use the ORS skills to provide opportunities for change talk instead. Last thing I'm going to show you, and then I have to open it up for questions. I just want you to have an appreciation for, and I keep doing this the wrong way. Sorry, let me share my screen for what resources are available to you. So this is too many words for a slide. Forgive me for that. I'd be happy to share my slides with anyone who's interested. But this is kind of the common progression of learning MI. So in the first box where there's an orange arrow, it says learn about MI. And this is what we're doing right now. You're learning about motivational interviewing. You're learning what it is so that you can make a decision about if you'd really like to invest some time in learning how to do it. And then often people will go to a longer workshop, maybe 8 to 20 hours. Of course, 20 hours would be over multiple days, don't worry. And those workshops usually include plenty of time for practicing skills. Sometimes people are pretty satisfied with that and they'd say, okay, I'm good. I got my workshop. That's all I really wanted. Okay, that's no problem. Other times people are so passionate about motivational interviewing, they want to get some coaching. That's something that you can look into. And because there's right now no such thing as a certification, the closest thing we would have to that is in the blue arrow, where you can join the organization I'm a part of and become a trainer to teach other people. That's right now the closest thing we have to being credentialed in motivational interviewing is to be a member of the training group. And you can see in the box that it's called MINT, Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers. My contact information, I will actually copy and paste this into the chat box. So that you can take a picture. You can do that right now if you'd like, a screenshot, a picture with your phone, whatever you'd like. But you can email me at kate@advocacyacademy.org. You will see this again in just a moment. There are also all sorts of books, folks. And I couldn't begin to go through them. There's like 30 of them now, maybe even more. I would encourage you to just reach out to me if you're looking for a book recommendation, or if you don't need a recommendation, just explore on the internet all of the books that are available. There's just so many of them now. And with that said, I'm going to go to the chat box and make sure that you have, oops, that's not the right thing. Yeah, it is. Okay. I'm going to make sure you have my email address and a couple of other things. There's my email address again, kate@advocacyacademy.org. Also my website. If you go to my website, there's a page there that says members. To me, you're all members now. We met, we hung out for an hour. You're a member now. Members get to use that password that I have put there, which you see in all capital letters, ADVOCAN. It does have to be in all capital letters. So hit your caps lock when you do this. But if you use that password, you can go to the members page and get a bunch of resources. There are videos about motivational interviewing if you want to learn more, blogs, articles, all kinds of things, a list of books if you'd like to play around with what the books are. I tend to keep all those resources on that page so people can always access it. I never change the password, so it will be that password for years to come, but I do update the list. So you might want to check back periodically and see what I've added. If you would like a certificate that says you were here today and you participated, you can click that link and complete a little request form. It will give me your email address and you should automatically get a certificate in your email in like 20 seconds. And that's just a plug again for my podcast. If you're interested, if you'd like to go to a longer workshop, you can find upcoming events at my Eventbrite page. I've taken up way too many minutes of our question time. So now I'm going to ask, with our 5 or 6 minutes left, what questions do you have? While people might be thinking about them, I'm going to scroll up and see what I've missed here. There might be some questions. People are asking for slides. Whatever you need. Okay. So I'll pause and just see if there are other questions. Best open-ended questions to use. So you're not going to like my answer, Misty. Because even though I could rattle off some open-ended questions that are common in MI, honestly, the best ones to use are the ones that sound like you. I get a little worried when people get their hands on like a workbook about motivational interviewing or something, or a worksheet, and then they go work with a client and they're like reciting questions that they've read somewhere. It starts to sound a little phony. Not that you would do that, not that you would do that, Misty, but it's just my worry, as a trainer. So honestly, the best questions are the ones that come from your natural voice. But since you're asking, sure. I mean, sometimes we ask questions like, what makes you want to make this change or make this decision? It's a question that's evoking a person's desires. We might ask questions like, how capable or confident do you feel to make this change? What strengths do you have to make this change? Again, we're evoking these positive things that can help a person start to advocate for doing it. I like to ask, what are your reasons to do this? Even when someone says to me, gosh, I don't know about all this, I'm not sure I'm ready, I will say, I hear that. I hear that you're not really ready. You're not really convinced. Not my job to try and convince you. I won't do that. But hypothetically, if you did make a step toward making this change or making this decision, what would be a reason for you to do it? What would be something that might nudge you in that direction? I play around with hypotheticals a lot. It creates a safe space for people. Hypothetically, if you were going to do this, how would you go about it? How would you feel? Things like that. Great. Another question here was, where do I put the code? But it looks like that's been answered. And I'll just pause and see if there's anything else that I could answer in like 2 minutes. This is always when I get that question that's so profound that I really can't answer it in 2 minutes. Um, Edith asked, do you encourage them to write a different narrative? Maybe not overtly, Edith. Maybe that isn't part of my repertoire, but I think in my own way, I help people create a different narrative when in their own minds, it's been, I can't, I won't, I don't want to, this is pointless, this is stupid, why even bother? I do try to help people voice aloud a different narrative that gives credit to both sides of them. Very quickly, I'll say, and then this will have to be the last thing, I will say, I'm working on a research study at the University of Pennsylvania right now with some physical therapists. I am not a physical therapist, but the participants in the study meet with a physical therapist who tells them a bunch of things they have to do. Do these stretches, take this, use this cream, do deep breathing, all these instructions, do this, do this, do this. And then I meet with the participants to help them figure out like their own motivations to do any of this and fitting it into their own lives. And I had a patient say to me the other day, it was on Zoom. He got real close to the camera, like I could see up his nostrils. And he got real close and he said, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not doing any of this. And I probably shouldn't have laughed, but it struck me as a little funny. So I think I had a little laughter, like, okay, all right. Thanks for joining the call anyway. I mean, you didn't have to join knowing you are certainly not doing any of these things. And he said, well, I didn't see any point in lying to you. And I said, I really appreciate that. It doesn't get anybody anywhere if you lie to me. And he said, this is all ridiculous, all these plans. And I said, of all the plans you've been given by the physical therapist, which one seems least ridiculous to you? And it was our way of just opening the door to one little thing that he might not dismiss. And I thought maybe I'm helping him create a little bit of a different narrative. It's not just stupid and a big waste of time, but there may be one little thing that was a little less stupid that maybe we could talk about. So I try to go there with people. Okay, thanks for the comments, folks. I do see those of you who are writing things like, thank you, it was helpful. And I like to hear that. It's always hard on a webinar setting to know if the content is landing. So it's helpful for me to read that this was resonating with you. Be in touch. I like to hear from people. Send me your questions. Talk to me about those challenges. I am definitely happy to respond. In the meantime, yeah, I was just about to say, I'll bring Hillary back on if there's any closing thoughts that you may have.
Yeah, no, Dr. Watson, this has been really a great webinar. I got a few text messages even of people saying they really appreciated you today. So
Good.
I think this was a really good topic. And like you said, it's an entry point. I think
Yeah.
there's so much more to learn and grow in this area. So I just encourage all of you to, go to her website and read a book about it and just use this as a tool to just continue to grow and learn in the work that you're doing. So thank you all for joining us today and taking time out of your day to join us on this webinar. And Dr. Watson, we really appreciated your time today. So
My pleasure.
thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
everybody.